laban ng damit ng kasintahan, lalo na't siya'y tapat sa sumpaan. May kasiyahang taglay ang damdamin at nadadamang pagmamahal na walang hanggan. Kung may hirap man ang paglalabay, may ginhawa. Dulot ay tuwa kung malinis na ang labada. Ngunit ang saya ay lumulungkot kung makuha isang sulat sa buhat sa iba. Kakabag-kabag, dahan-dahan pa sa pagbasa, at baka ito ang magwawakas ng ligaya. Kung magkagayon ay mabuti pang pumanaw. Kung wala ako ay wala na rin tagapaglaban. Sarap laban ng damit ng kasintahan, lalo na't siya'y tapat sa sumpaan. May kasiyahang taglay ang damdamin at nadadamang pagmamahal na walang hanggan. Kung may hirap man ang paglalabay, may ginhawa. Dulot ay tuwa kung malinis na ang labada. Ngunit ang saya ay lumulungkot kung makuha isang sulat sa bulsa buhat sa iba. Kakabag-kabag, dahan-dahan pa sa pagbasa, at baka ito ang magwawakas ng ligaya. Kung magkagayon ay mabuti pang pumanaw. Kung wala ko ay wala na rin tagapaglaban.
Basta perming di kalimtan kang inday umbrella. Kung maglanit nag-istorya sa iyang hirigoma. Mulit gabi nakikasabang sayang kasera. Kay human ikan sa klase muagi pa o gugma-gugma. Ang pobreng ginikanan niya sa probinsya naningkamot ng taon para sa iyang pag-eskwela. Si tatay, si nanay, misaling nilaong kang inday kay bright raba. Ang kudyuta kay pamerenda. Naistap na ang pag-eskwela kay si inday na disgrasya. May graduate sa pagkamama sa batang way diploma. May uli sa probinsya o nagpasol nga way sama. Nanaywa ako'y makimo kay minyo di ay lakiha. Ang pobreng ginikanan niya sa probinsya naningkamot ng taon para sa iyang pag-eskwela. Si tatay, si nanay, misalig nilaong kang inday kay bright raba. Ang kudyuta kay pamerenda. Na-stop na ang pag-eskwela kay si inday na disgrasya. May graduate sa pagkamama sa batang way diploma. Di uli sa probinsya ug nagbasol nga way sama. Nanaywa ako'y mahimo kay minyon di ay dumulakiha, kay minyon di ay dumulakiha, kay minyon di ay dumulakiha.
Every time I go in, there's a street, a name of the street, yay, yay, funky, funky Broadway, down on Broadway, there's a nightclub, now, the name of the nightclub, yay, yay, funky, funky Broadway, down on Broadway, hey, there's a crowd now, name of the crowd, baby, a Broadway crowd, down on Broadway, there's a dance, name of the dance, funky, funky Broadway. Wiggle my legs now, baby. Shake your head now, baby. Bell do the jingling now, baby. Shake, shake, shake now. You don't know, oh baby. Yeah, you don't know now. Yeah, do the funky Broadway.
Sa'yo mo'y tunay at napakaganda, kaya't ako'y hangang-hanga sa'yo. Gawin mo lang at gagayahin ko, ayos ba? Sabihin mo at isasayaw ko, awit na to ay para sa'yo. Gawin mo lang at gagayahin ko, ayos ba?
Cuckoo! Thanks, Les.
Hey, Seda.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this week. Sorry, the music just stopped and I was like, it's so purely quiet. I couldn't tell if it was me. Thanks, everyone, for joining again. If you've already been joining the past couple series, welcome back. If it is your first time joining this week, we are in week 4 of week 5 for Diaspora Peoples Month. And welcome for tonight's topic, which is politics. So pretty much, if you aren't familiar, Les and I are representing SAMASAMA. Barrett is representing the Sustainable Culture Lab. We decided to collaborate on an event together to really kind of facilitate a conversation surrounding sort of the diaspora identity in July, because July is known for what in America? Independence Day. And we kind of wanted to sort of shift what the conversation is going to be, or the narrative, into something more insightful, kind of giving space to the identities of America by, using, by focusing on that diaspora narrative. So, what am I saying? Don't mind me, I'm holding a baby this time. It's a little bit of a meltdown mode this week, today in this house. Maybe it's the rain. But so SAMASAMA really started out originally as really just sort of a gathering for Asian-American Pacific Heritage Month. And we kind of wanted to continue to change it every year, add it every year, to really kind of do justice to everyone that has participated in these shows, who represent more than just from the Asian-American community, but really sort of that diaspora identity, right? And I think that's the most important thing that was part of, what SAMASAMA is, being together. But yeah, so this year, because of COVID, we couldn't do our annual exhibit. And what was the best way to do was to actually just kind of collaborate with what the Sustainable Culture Lab is doing, and allow the artists to do exactly what it is they're amazing at, but kind of push a little bit of that conversation. And that's the reason why we decided to, every week, to cover a different topic, a different theme. And I will let Barrett here, the professor, as I like to call him, to kind of introduce what the Sustainable Culture Lab is.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I just have to always say, like, I'm constantly amazed at all the stuff Seda always does, because she's got kids and a family, and the balancing. And so I just think it's always cool that she always finds the time to do cool stuff with us and cool stuff with a bunch of other people too. But I'm Barrett. I'm with the Sustainable Culture Lab, and we are a new cultural think tank in DC. And the philosophical cultural work that we focus on derives largely from this word ethnocide. Ethnocide is the destruction of culture while keeping the people, and we apply that framework, that language, to the transatlantic slave trade, where obviously the purpose of that was to take African people from the continent and extract their culture to create like a chattel slavery system where people could be oppressed in perpetuity due to like the extraction of culture. And this division is something that exists in America to this very day. It defines a lot of our cultural divisions. And I think, one of our focuses as an institute is language and empowering people with the accurate and appropriate language to describe various inequalities and social cultural structures in the US. And so ethnocide helps with that, fill that linguistic void. But as an organization that focuses on culture and acknowledging the extraction of culture is a big part of American life, one of the things we definitely try to do is collaborate with culture creators, artists, creatives, the people that create the culture that makes people, find purpose and be inspired and have new perspectives of seeing their environment. And also art can fill like a linguistic void. So much of art is, if you don't know how to say something, let me show it to you in a unique way so that you can see what we're seeing in the world when you don't necessarily know how to say it. And so our collaboration with SAMASAMA and Seda and Les is many ways, like we might come up with the language to articulate stuff, but art helps manifest language. Art helps people get inspired and create, and it's a foundation of culture. And so, I might be the philosopher, but I need I need the artists, and the artists need philosophers. And so this combination just works perfectly. And, the reason we picked this month is because not only are we going to put like an artistic spin on independence, but it's a linguistic spin, it's a cultural spin, and it's a philosophical shift. And by putting that all together, we're able to create stuff that's really, really cool. And so that's what we're trying, that's what we do, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first talks that we did was kind of a really great catalyst for us to kind of just kick off that conversation, right? I mean, like we kind of have these conversations with one another all the time, but we kind of realized that there was like a real substantial thing that we can kind of keep going with these conversations and applying it and connecting it with the art. And I think all the artists tonight, and really the past participating artists this whole month, have really shown the work that you're doing with Sustainable Culture Lab, just the educational part of it and the discourse really is shown through the art and the artists, and you know what it is that they're trying to show. This is so intimate and so personal, really, especially when we talk about philosophy, and you know that is kind of like your big thing, but really truly it's sort of like the fundamental part of our culture, you know. And I always like to say the artists are sort of the philosophers. You know, you're kind of putting out there, you know, your art is the medium, it's the vehicle to the language, to the ideas, to the values that we're all trying to, you know, live within, you know. So when it comes to the politics theme that we chose this week, you know, I think whether you feel apolitical, whether you feel like you don't stand on one side or the other, I think whether we like it or not, and it doesn't have to have a negative connotation to kind of exist, that our being is political, whether it means as a diaspora, you know, representing from a diaspora group, whether it has to do with the geopolitics, which most of the majority of the time it really is, you know, whatever it is that you personally stand for, however you choose to identify, all of that is political, right? And so I think for the artists tonight, what's really awesome is there's some really amazing I mean, we've been so fortunate to have some really amazing people anyway, but tonight really does kind of connect with the politics theme. I think some of the other past themes that we've had, we've been able to really tie it in because it all sort of connects. You know, we've done migration, heritage, philosophy, right? And then tonight, I think we have some really awesome players out there that are really putting it out in the work in a much more really sort of out there way in the language and the forms of art that they're putting out there. But yeah, I mean, as far as like thinking about artists affecting change, right? I think that is one of the most universal forms of allowing anybody, whatever your perspective is, to really connect emotionally to the agenda that you're really trying to kind of project out there, and really puts humanity to that political agenda, whatever it is that you choose. And I think that's sort of the social political shift that I think that we're in right now, is to kind of see the humanity, and then, you know, work towards the policy change. But yeah, we will kick it off in a little bit. I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit to what I'm saying here, Garrett.
Yeah, totally. No, like to kind of shift it with a philosophical perspective. If you use like the language of ethnocide, you can see that with that division, that America created a political system, a government, with that division just like at its foundation, where there are people that were in America that got access to government and politics, and a group of people that were in America that were supposed to not have any access to it at all, and never be able to even like exercise their ability to, you know, show their humanity. And so as a person of color, community of color, our actions in this American society are inherently political, because our political society was structured based on our inability to engage in politics or to have equal representation or opportunity. So just striving and expressing the need to be a human being with equal capacity to do anything is just inherently political. So like if you are a person of color, existence in America is just a political act, because the narrative that America professes is one that communities of color are here to be subjugated. So like if you try to live as above being a subject and as a citizen, you are inherently doing something political. And clearly artists and what everyone here is trying to live as a human, a citizen, and not just a subject. And so there we go.
Yep. So we're going to get started. We're going to introduce our first artist, but before I do that, we are recording this. So if you somehow fall off or you wanted to rewatch it, we will be sending out not only the video, but also the links, the websites, and everything to Sustainable Culture Lab, SAMASAMA, as well as all the participating artists. Save your questions for last. We find that kind of works best for us. But feel free to throw anything in the chat because we're watching it and we'll kind of collect it at the end. Our first artist is one of our very own, actually, with the SAMASAMA group is Shani Shih. She is a community advocate and multidisciplinary visual artist based in Washington, D.C. As an artist, Shani works primarily in painting, illustration, street art, and murals, and draws heavily from hip hop and graffiti. Through her creations, she aims to speak to visceral, emotional, and bodily experience in a violent social world and communicate shared human stories of suffering, endurance, and hope. As a working tenant organizer, founder of Chinatown Art Studio, and co-founder of 411 Collective, Shani is dedicated to supporting political art action as a catalyst for cultural transformation and systems change, as well as community empowerment through the arts. So Shani, kick it off.
Oh, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Are we good? Okay. All right. Hey everyone, thank you so much, Les and Barrett, for the introduction and for including me in today's event. You know, these are such encouraging and empowering dialogues, and you know, so big ups for facilitating this. So today, I'm gonna use my time to share about my work, a bit about my journey as it relates to art, politics, community work, and you know, in reflecting on that journey, I've been thinking a lot about what's going on. Amid the uprising for Black Lives, I have seen you know, a pretty intense process within our artists of color circles, within 401 Collective itself, you know, where we are wrestling with how we should contribute within these revolutionary times. And there's a lot that is very cut and dry, but there's also a lot that isn't. So I'm hoping to, you know, share some lessons that I've been learning in my journey, and hopefully it will also speak to this question a bit. So I'll jump right into it. I paint, I illustrate, and am a developing muralist, and I have also been working as a tenant organizer for the past 3 years. And you know, in the past decade of being in DC, in full disclosure, I was born and raised in New Jersey. So you know, in the past decade, I have had the fortune of being a part of projects and groups that steward culture and political art action in the city. And a lot of this started in you know, not too long ago in 2015, you know, where I started down a few paths, you know, including my art journey, but you know, so all these different paths I think have been converging as of late. But I'll start by talking about, you know, when I started to get involved in the Asian-American community in DC. I started off by volunteering with the Tenant Association, battling displacement in Chinatown. You know, huge shout out to my friend Caroline, who was working with those folks, who brought me in. But you know, so I started working with them, and then I also started working with Asian-American Lead, you know, which is an organization that services low-income Asian-American families in the city. And since then, I've really been able to support AA Lead and other Asian-American organizations in providing like identity-oriented art workshops and programming and such. And so a couple years back, I was able to start a summer programming series based in Chinatown in partnership with 1882 Foundation, which is really one of the remaining kind of cultural institutions in the neighborhood. And so that I think for me, starting that was a direct response to what I was seeing to be the impacts of displacement and gentrification in that particular neighborhood, and like, you know, how that impacts youth and families. But yeah. So the second path I started on was, you know, a path of hip hop, graffiti, street art, murals, and basically, you know, a lot of things started for me when I met my good homie and you know, #1 collaborator, Monolith. Shout out, he's coming up next. So you know, we met, we became quick friends, and then we organized a graffiti, a street art exhibit dedicated to, you know, uplifting the Bernie Sanders platform, progressive platform, through graffiti, you know, art and culture, and so, you know, Burn the System, I think, immediately led to another path. In that fall of 2016, oh sorry, so you know, we put on the show at the Fridge, and there was we did a graffiti production on the outside. Shout out to Monolith for organizing that, in addition to, you know, an exhibit featuring, you know, a bunch of local national artists and inside. So that's what this is here. So yeah, that fall, Monolith teamed up with myself and some other friends. Shout out to JP, I think, who's in the audience too. So, you know, we wanted to do something in support of the Native struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline. So we organized a campaign in partnership with local Piscataway and indigenous community folks to do a Water is Life mural tour, you know, across 4 cities on the way to Standing Rock. And so these are some of the photos from that project. We did a mural here in DC as well, and some events. And so at the end of this project, that's when 411 came together, and it, you know, it basically we wanted to continue using hip hop driven public art to support community empowerment and movement work. And so 411 is still going strong, and also Monolith and I are still, you know, working together. This year we did so we did this mural in Navy Yard, and it was supposed to be a lead up to another Burn the System show. Unfortunately, as you know, Bernie dropped out. We're not gonna talk about that right now. Probably get very upset, but yeah, so that was this year. So I'll share a little bit, you know, about some recent projects I've been doing. I did some like a mural in Chinatown, inspired by the legacy of the Black Panther Party and more broadly, you know, the Black Power movement, which had, you know, such a multifaceted, like deep legacy in our world, and really also influenced my worldview and my identity years ago when I was still figuring things out. And yeah, it showed me, I think learning from the Black Power movement really showed me what it means to build true solidarity and true community power in the context of our country. So that, and then so in kind of consideration of the struggle against displacement in that neighborhood, which is a shared, you know, Asian-American and Black struggle, you know, in a lot of the in the 2 really remaining affordable housing complexes in that neighborhood, I tried to include some anti-displacement messages, and as you know, a neighborhood that's almost completely gentrified. Recently, 401, we supported, or we worked with Link Up, which is a local anti-displacement and a community capacity building grassroots organization, to support the folks at Park Morton. They are, you know, part of a large kind of community of folks across the city who are in a battle with the city, which often tends to be the biggest slumlord in the District of Columbia, in trying to get a decent housing. They're waiting for redevelopment. They're waiting for protections to make sure that no one will be displaced as they have been relocated. And so, you know, this was done, you know, as kind of a live mural for them, and that's me. With 411, or some members from 411, we did banners recently for some organizations, including on the Black Youth Project. I designed the middle one. And for Chinatown Art Studio, that's happening now, July and August, and we're doing it over Zoom. Have a small but awesome class of Asian American youth, and again, it's really meant to be a space to provide Asian American youth the tools to express themselves, to define their own identities, and to make the world a better place through art. And we try to touch on some topics, but of course, we encourage them to speak to what their hearts desire, which is like large teddy bears and like pretty lights in the room. So there's room for all of it. And finally, Monolith and I, we did like a COVID street art response project. Racism.org is basically like a collection of political art that we also got up, around the city. I did the Cancel Rant one. Some of my personal work. So I'll just share a little bit about this. Like my personal expression for the past 5 years has been focused on like compositions of expressive figures intertwined with visual themes of industrialism. So we're talking like warehouses, like tunnels, shipping yards, rail yards, and like urban development. And for me, these kind of themes capture the energy of the man-made world and the great suffering that it manifests through capitalism, borders, entrenched systems of violence, through generational, lifelong, everyday impression based on these completely constructed categories that we experience as real. And I think I just try to speak to what it's like to live in my body, what it's like to see through my eyes. And I deal with a lot of mental health challenges, some physical health challenges. So I render anxiety, chaos, confusion, a lot of intense love, joy, and hope. And so I try to speak in a way that can be related to and understood universally. And I feel like as I've grown as a person, and also deepened my study and practice of graffiti specifically, my art has become, I've become more intentional about using my art, form, movement, and rhythm within my art to communicate my experience and like revelations about transformation, spiritual growth, transcendence, truth of existence, consciousness, all these things that are underneath our social reality. So yeah, this is just some of pictures of my stuff. Some of my stickers and other stuff. So I think as I reflect on my journey, when I left New Jersey for DC years ago, I think deep down I felt really angry. I felt confused and isolated in a way I did not know how to articulate. Even though at that time I was really passionate about social justice issues, I did not know how to articulate my own experience. And I felt really deeply alienated, not only from white society, but also my own community, from Taiwanese, Chinese American immigrant communities that in East Asian immigrant communities that I grew up around. Of course, there's internalized inferiority to whiteness, a lot of experiences with that, but also I felt like super disempowered for many reasons. In terms of alienation from Asian American communities, like we were given this narrative that we were supposed to claim our cultural heritage and our Taiwanese identity on some essential level, which was really hard for me because I had never been to Taiwan. We didn't really have the money to travel there, and And you know, there are just a lot of things about claiming something on that level that just felt very unnatural to me. My Chinese wasn't great. Also, there's a certain complacency that I felt from the upper middle class East Asian immigrant world that I didn't know how to deal with. I felt like subtle condescension from other Asians towards my family. You know, being a low income family, you know, I felt condescension towards me for being passionate about social issues. So I think I had a lot of powerlessness about myself and my place in society and in my voice. So my worldview, it changed drastically when I came to DC. Of course, I went through, came to DC for school. I like sought out, you know, as many I know have a self-re-education and radicalization. Like I learned from a lot of different communities, like the Tibetan community. I learned, of course, a lot from the history of Black organizing in this country. But really what changed my life and changed the direction of my path was hip hop. And hip hop is this culture created by Black and brown young people in New York in the 70s. It is what made it possible for me, even as a woman, to start feeling powerful. And it changed my life and the lives of so many in this country. And this is a culture based on art forms, fueled by this idea that your voice deserves to be seen and to be heard, no matter who you are, where you come from, what kind of education you have, if you went to art school or not. You know, if you have something to say, the drive to master your craft, you know, you can do that. And it's an art space that unapologetically, like graffiti specifically, takes up public space that is otherwise controlled and dominated, right? That we were not allowed to have access to. And so, yeah, I think Black Star was the first album that really pulled me into hip hop music and kept me going. I fell in love with hip hop producers like Madlib and Jay Dilla, and like connected with beats. I from there I started developing my own individual art style, influenced by street art, graffiti aesthetics. Not that they're the same thing, but yeah. So but they're connected. And then I started to make sticker art, street art, tagging. And then at that time, I really wanted to do murals, but I didn't know how to start. And I didn't really see myself doing it. But really continuing to be involved in the hip hop community has allowed me to grow in that direction, which I'm very thankful for. But so, you know, in terms of some lessons, I've seen why hip hop has spread like wildfire in the short span of a few decades, and you know why it's literally changed the entire cultural world as we know it, and given rise to so many different subcultures and cultural platforms. It's because it's a language that not only carries on the voices of communities, but is also a map for individual growth and empowerment. And so, you know, street art, murals, political art, street art, people are like Banksy, Shepard Fairey, extremely famous. They would not exist without the foundations that hip hop and graffiti built. And so, you know, there are a lot of issues around inclusivity in hip hop, but these are such powerful tools in carrying messages of change and empowering people. And so my goal is really to try to, despite, you know, my everyday challenges that I'm facing, to carry this power forward, and help uplift others on different levels through these art forms. So during this time, you know, and this is kind of the last thought I wanted to share, I am seeing a lot of internal wrestling, like I kind of alluded to before, within our artist communities, on what to do in this moment, when we're seeing our Black brothers and sisters under attack, and you know, so many communities suffering disproportionately under the pandemic. So what do we do, especially when money and opportunity that artists depend on are often controlled by institutions with problematic motives and impact. So, you know, I'll use myself as an example. I did this mural in Chinatown, and even though it was sponsored by an awesome nonprofit called the Paints Institute, it was also co-sponsored by the DC Downtown Bid. in the DC downtown bid, it is a racist organization built to facilitate gentrification in many aspects, right? There are a million ways to look at everything, but that's what the impact of that organization has been. But for me, I chose to do this piece because, I was able to put up a message about displacement in a neighborhood where those sorts of messages are never on the streets. From an Asian-American standpoint. And so, that was my vision behind it. But, there are many questions. There's so much to weigh when working with institutions. What's moral and what's not. There's a lot of wrestling of that question of should we work within the system to bring it down, or tear the system down from the outside and focus our energies on abolition. Are those mutually exclusive? That's another question, right? There's a desperate need for like a balance between calling out and calling in. I think a lot of artists are confused by those energies. There's so many deep conversations around both of these things. It's hard to know where to go. I think many artists are responding to the deep urgency of this moment, but there's also a lot of exhaustion, I think, from artists of color of being forced to live in a constant state of resistance or a reactionary state to violence from our system. And, I know a lot of artists who care very deeply, but are drained of having to define themselves constantly in opposition to something, in a philosophical and existential sense. And people who want to focus their energies into creating and imagining. So what is right and what is wrong? Is that the question we should be asking? Or is it more that, is there room for all these different roles in the revolution that we're seeing right now? And I think that's really the lesson that I've been learning, that there is room for all of it, as long as we can generally agree on what the systemic issues are, and recognizing our different perspectives and levels of privilege, and what that what kind of power that affords us as individual artists. I think that's all good, and so some people need to be able to help disrupt and protest. Others need to be able to facilitate healing through their art. This thing is a long game, and so I think as long, like I've been learning that we just need to commit to doing our part. And if corrupt institutions are manipulating artists' work, right, what are we going to do to deal with that as a long-term issue? Are we going to unpack the issue honestly and build alternatives so we don't have to compromise in order to survive? Are we going to be able to do this without demonizing each other for our different kind of positions in the game right now? So yeah, these are a lot of the questions that have been going through my head, and what I will end with, I think, is that like we are in this watershed moment of such pain and like grief and reckoning, and if artists are wondering like what should we do, what is the best way for us to contribute, of course you're taking your own experience and your mental health is important, but we have to also inform our choices with the lived experiences of people who are being affected the most by these issues, and remembering, and all of us, we come from generations of families who've lived through this history of violence in our world. There's of course colonization, slavery, genocide, imperial wars, like US-backed coups and dictatorships. We got 5 colonies, like still in the Pacific and the Caribbean, where some of our families are from. Like, we got family members and like shuttled off to the military in territories that can't vote. Like there's circles of violence and trauma and all this. We have friends and family in jail, and so I think when making decisions like, as long as we can remember, right, keep those experiences and keep that lived reality in mind, it will translate into, you know, more informed decisions about what work we produce and what we get involved in. Sorry, I forgot to press a lot of things. So yeah, this is a picture of the tenants in Museum Square. I connected it to DC Downtown Bid because they really facilitated gentrification in that area. And these are folks kind of fighting to stay in their homes, 4th and K. Yeah, so I think I'll end with that. I wanted to show or like play this video as I was speaking before, but I forgot. But this is a film put together by Brittany Washington with Mutual Aid Network of DC, and they compiled a really comprehensive and amazing kind of list of needs in the city because of, or sorry, like given the great systemic violence that we face. So housing, education, you know, mass incarceration, law enforcement, health, everything. Yeah, so that's me.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I found your arts, a lot of my philosophical work is trying to provide language to help people articulate stuff that they would struggle to say, and a lot of your work like spoke to that linguistic gap where you're trying to show something that you didn't know how to say, but you saw, how can I articulate my life and my experiences through art? And so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Shani, I mean, everything that you were saying as far as, you know, coming from an Asian American identity and, you know, versus an Asian immigrant identity, you know, are just goes to show how much more nuanced and, you know, just so multi-layered, multifaceted, you know, our identities are, that, you know, you're kind of subjected to being put in the box to the point of not being able to understand those frustrations and feelings that you're, you know, that you're going through, that you've been beautifully been able to kind of put through your art. But we will go on to the next, not to be abrupt, but we're going to move on to the next. Someone you actually collaborated with, Shani, and also is shown in a SAMASAMA exhibit as well. So I'm going to go with his art name, Monolith, and I'll let him introduce himself by his name if he chooses to. Monolith is an artist, activist, and organizer based in Washington, D.C., working through the visual language of graffiti, street art, and design. The tradition of his art stems from hip-hop culture and is influenced by pop culture and social justice. In 2016, he co-created the Burn the System art show and co-founded the 411 Collective, and facilitated DC to Standing Rock mural tour. I haven't seen you in a while, so it's great to see you here and joining us for this month. Thank you for taking the time. If you want to go ahead and share your screen, go for it.
Yeah, can you hear me? Is it showing up?
It's perfect.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's good to see you too. Grateful to be on this talk with everybody here, and definitely following up with Shani, my close friend who we've collaborated with, and has definitely been, you know, affected a lot of my work and the work that we've done together. So yeah, I guess I just want to start by, eventually I'll start showing some of my work over the years, and with that kind of share my story about where my art comes from. I'll just go over my background a little bit. My background and passion for art comes from graffiti primarily, and my love of hip hop since I was young. And I kind of started by tagging on stuff when I was in grade school. And then from there, it kind of evolved as it became more connected to the elements of hip hop through like old school and underground old school underground music and rap and breakdancing and understanding more about graffiti throughout the time I was kind of like in high school. And and then around that time, I really started to paint more complex pieces and become serious about the art form around like 2005. And I was heavily influenced by like New York, Virginia, and Baltimore graffiti writers. Yeah, I was becoming more politicized over the years since then through just reading different political work and kind of unraveling what I'd been taught to believe from dominant culture, education, and my family. So I think a big leap for me and all that kind of came with Obama's 2008 election and kind of the language around lobbying and corporate control of our government. Because around that time, I spent a lot of time and energy believing and supporting this candidate, Obama, and leading up to his election. And a big part of that was there was an unprecedented show of support from the underground artist community around that time, like in graffiti and street art, that otherwise would not have been connected to the electoral politics. And this kind of really drew me in, seeing political art in this time, in this way. And I was kind of already going to New York a lot and very familiar with artists that inspired me, such as Shepard Fairey, Banksy, and Ron English, who were using street art in a very large scale and thought-provoking way, and in most cases, very politically. And also around that time, I was blessed to be able to see 5 Points before it was destroyed. Also, it got destroyed because the area was being heavily gentrified, and they were able to end up building condos over it, which they ended up losing the lawsuit, I think recently. So I mean, like, after witnessing the years of hypocrisy of political leaders such as Obama that promised hope and only advanced the worst parts of this oppressive and racist capitalist system, I gradually realized that real change only comes from grassroots movements led by people. And like around 2013, I started exhibiting in group art shows, and I like the Fridge Gallery and painting a lot with my good friend Maspas. And yeah, my brother Dabs, who since passed away, was highly instrumental in my development. This is kind of where I really started to grow in a radical political art community after joining 2B Studio at 411 New York Avenue. So there was 2B Studios was in Union Arts, so there was a bunch of different collectives and people working on different kinds of art. But that's where Dabs created art, and that's where I came in and worked with him, and then a bunch of the other folks that really worked there. And so I want to say a big part of my motivation and inspiration from like the art that I create and where it comes from is really the community and the space that I was lucky enough to be around, and just how conducive that was to kind of where my art went and who I was working with. And yeah, so a lot of those people were like getting to know folks like Strike, who use graffiti in a political way, who's an old school graffiti writer, Adapt, who was doing a lot of wheat paste around the city of like folks, illustrating folks and their struggle, and then Revolution, who has been a long time political artist in the city, who has been mostly responsible for a lot of the major art movement work in the city. And they've been doing it like years before I have. So I really learned to create political art in the way of my own understanding by educating myself and this work. And it was important to be connected to folks in the movement and being informed directly by the folks doing that work. And so right here in this picture, this is kind of like when I started going to 411 New York Avenue in the studio. My friend Adapt put this show together, Incarcerated Masses, which called for an end to mass incarceration, detention, and deportation. And this is actually an art piece created by Mumia Abu Jamal, who was connected to this show. And so for this show, I created this piece over here to the right. And it's basically had the style of like civil rights protest art, but connected to the call to push Obama to sign this deferred action for all. And so this is like one of the more first political pieces I started doing in connection to the studio and the folks doing the work there. This piece over here, it's kind of like when I started exhibiting work in the city over at the Fridge Gallery. I had a show that my friend Maspas put on. It was called Kids. And so here, this piece, I was kind of exploring, I think a part of my style, you know, like, so I really like typography, I really like graffiti, and then using that to create these different messages. So on the top, there's a graffiti piece, and then another style of graffiti, and then just different like typefaces over here. And to the right, this is a Black Lives Matter piece I did, I think like around 2000, maybe around 2014. Yeah, this happened, I painted this for an event, kind of like in that way again, like using graffiti to highlight, you know, major social issue that was happening, and then recalling the style of an iconic graffiti movie called Wild Style. And let me see here. And then, so yeah, so around this time, you know, shortly after I put together this show with Shani, we were kind of talking a lot, just like politically connecting, and it was around the time when Bernie was running the first time, and so we came up with this show. And on the outside again was, as part of this show, we took over the whole outside area. And so I was kind of trying to, again, use graffiti in this way. And we basically used the idea of like the graffiti battle, like when people paint another name, and to see who does it best and using their style. So really being able to exhibit that idea, but in this way related to Bernie Sanders, but because of like mostly the social issues that he was bringing up with the campaign that we were trying to focus on with this show. And so shortly after that, we kind of came together with some of the folks from that show, with my friend Divorce Culture, and it was around the time of Standing Rock. So trying to figure out, you know, how can we use our art to put these issues and things that are happening at the time at the forefront, in another way, using graffiti and murals and things like that. So we kind of came up with the idea of going across country along the Rust Belt and created these Water is Life murals. So over here I'm painting over in Detroit, and to the right is one of the final places that we went to go paint in Minneapolis, on this Indigenous Community Center. And so that was an amazing experience. You know, really brought us together for the first time as a collective, and then from there is where we really kind of cemented, you know, this new group of people that were passionate about the same things and using art in this way again, coming from the folks that were doing that before, and also involving a lot of them as well, who are in our collective. And that followed up with other work. So I'm really into graphic design and just using like as many of these art forms as possible. So in around 2017, there was the People's Climate March, and I created this poster that was used with that campaign, and we pasted up around the city, myself and Maspas. And then to the left here is the next major project that really followed our Standing Rock tour. I think I kind of cut off the picture a little bit, but you know, we have activists in our collective, and a big thing that has been important for me is that in our collective, we have activists and people that are connected more to the movement, and then myself as somebody who's like constantly in this process of like unlearning and learning, and just being able to be informed by the movements. And so like the activists in our collective really help with that a lot, and help facilitate these different aspects. And so we were able to basically like get space when Trump was being elected and create the first graffiti mural during inauguration, and as protests to Donald Trump and everything that he represented. So he kind of came up with the idea of representing these different things in each of the letters, like in this postcard style. And so that was the second major project. And then from there, I've just worked on other things. This was at Art Basel in Miami. I think about a year after he was elected, there was this big thing of like all the people that were protesting actually that day that we created that, where you could really see like how this administration was despotic and really trying to, you know, screw anybody over that was trying to rise up and have a voice. And so a lot of the people that were protesting were corralled and facing charges that were really going to mess up their lives for a long time. So there was this campaign to defend J20. So I made this piece to kind of highlight that, and again using like the different styles and like typography and graffiti and combining those things and like different forms of illustration. So here's like, I'm also really attracted to tattoo art. So there's some like American traditional tattoo art, Japanese traditional tattoo art mixed with typography and then graffiti to kind of highlight this message that was their main message, that protest is not a crime and shouldn't be treated as such. And so here's some other work that I did as well. And again, like, so when I create this political art, it's like a way of me understanding what I'm learning about, you know, these different aspects of like what's happening around us. So like gentrification, I wasn't as familiar with when I started coming to the city. Like years ago, maybe like 6 years ago, I didn't really know what that meant. And so like, you know, doing this work and working with the collective and working with movements, you know, I learned more and more. And then, so like creating this kind of art is like a way of like my, me being able to kind of speak on how I'm like learning, how I see it, and yeah, just disseminating in this way. So this piece over to the left, I kind of came up with this word, displacement capital, and just like using the acronym of DC to create this piece. So using the letters and then just like basic illustration style to show, you know, the way I kind of like understood it, and then the different layers to it and stuff like that. And then this piece to the left, to the right, I created after, and just like kind of the idea of, it just comes from like going through the city and just seeing over time more and more the city changing so much. And then a large symbol of that being all these cranes popping up everywhere. And then you can't even see the city anymore. And all you see is these cranes and just giant boxes everywhere, just overcrowding what the city used to look like. And then with that, you know, the ideas of everything that gentrification brings with it. So this is kind of like the idea of like, gentrification is killing our culture. And instead of a scythe, he has, as you can see, the crane that you see everywhere. These are just more like graffiti-oriented pieces. It's a Labor Day piece I made with my name and just highlighting like workers' rights. And to the left, this is a crushed ice piece, basically a political statement against what was happening at the border and what Trump was doing, and then just all the folks that are affected by what's happening over there. And I guess this is more recent work. So Shani mentioned that we were doing the Burn the System show, and this was going to be the follow-up. So to the left here, you know, there's the giant piece we did by the waterfront, and that was going to be a lead up to the show, and obviously with the pandemic that didn't happen, so that kind of like led into creating this piece over here to the right, and it's just a basic statement that capitalism is the virus. So just using these like different graphic design style, just, you know, you see the different viruses, and it literally just makes up the word capitalism. And so this is the last thing I'll show. So this is a collaboration with my homie in the collective, Divorce Culture. And again, this is like a progression of like where everything has gone with the uprising that followed the death of George Floyd, and where it's kind of led to, and the call for movement by Black lives to defund the police and invest in Black communities and what we really need, and the idea that we don't need police. And so combining these graphic element styles and graffiti and typography. And so I did the letters, and Divorce Culture did like the graphic elements, and here like the graffiti letters, just showing the power of graffiti and using these different art forms in this way, and like the power that has is like literally crushing the cop car. And this is over at Eaton Hotel. We literally just finished this, and for anybody interested, we're gonna like release a video for it tomorrow. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now, and yeah, thank you guys.
Ooh, those are some amazing works.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing this in person. You said this one is at the Eaton Hotel?
Yeah, we just finished it at the Eaton Hotel. It's like right by their entrance, and it's cool because I think they'll be planning on doing a few things around the mural, just I guess other ways that they're having to adapt to what's happening with the pandemic. I think they'll be doing some radio shows outside and some events, and I think marches will be going, I think it's on 12th Street, so down that, it's so a lot of folks will be able to see it or just get the message out there. But it's over at Eaton right now, and it should be up for a while.
Oh, this is Les. You can't see me, but that's where radio was, Seda, and then radio now. I'm gonna be streaming on where the cafe is. That's where radio is, and upstairs. So I'll be there tomorrow. Excited.
Oh, sweet. Okay, dope.
Yeah, we're gonna do all the plugs at the end of this event tonight,
Nice.
including Les's DJ sessions on Thursday there at the Eaton. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Your work is just like so intricate and just really awesome.
I will just say one last thing. Like a lot of it,
Sure.
like for me, has been a big part of my work has been collaborating with people, and that has been like really influential in terms of like ways of incorporating different styles and how people do things. And so like another big collaborator of mine, you know, like Shani's been a big collaborator, Divorce Culture has been a big collaborator, and just a lot of work I've done with the collective is like, yeah, just a big part of my work. And definitely all the folks that are in the collective and have done the work before that. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think it goes to show a little bit, just especially, you know, under this political theme that we decided to kind of, you know, focus on tonight is that being collaborative is a huge part, you know, you know, maybe you don't share the very specific, you know, agendas of everybody, but when you come together, you know, at the end of the day, it kind of goes to show that there's one movement and it can kind of represent so many different pieces on the back end. And speaking of collaborative, when we go to our next, we're actually doing a duo. If we get out of Monolith's screen here, we're actually doing something a little bit different for our next one. It's still, you know, gonna be fairly the same, but we have our friends here, Adriel Luis and Charles Jean-Pierre, that is gonna be doing an artist tour with us. So if you've all have participated in our talks before, you know, a lot of our artists will kind of share their screen, talk a little bit about their work. And in this case, we're actually doing it a little bit different. I'll go ahead and introduce our next. Actually, Barrett, did you have anything to say before I move on to our next two?
I'm still thinking about a lot, so I kind of prefer to like say something at the end.
Cross it till the end, yeah.
Encompass everything because they collaborated. So we're actually looking at like a good hour's worth of like collaborative, like political, artistic messaging, language, all that stuff. And so I kind of just want to like sit on it for like a minute.
No worries. And I kind of mentioned in the chat too, we'll again discuss to the end, but a lot of the artists are selling their work. So, all right, moving on to the next. Thank you all so much. Is Adriel Luis and Charles Jean-Pierre. I'm gonna kind of give a brief, very, very brief bio to both, and then a little bit of what their talk is gonna be. Mr. Adriel Luis is an artist, curator, poet, and community organizer. Adriel is currently the curator of digital and emerging media at the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. Mr. Charles Jean-Pierre, sorry, I just like really want to say your name as best as possible. It's such a beautiful name. Is a Haitian-American artist and educator. His work has been highlighted by numerous media outlets and was also a 2015 President Obama White House invitee for the role of art education in promoting national youth justice. Since 2016, visual artist Charles Jean-Pierre and curator Adriel Luis have cultivated their friendship through collaborations for the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center Series for Cultural Labs. Another collaboration tonight. Charles Jean-Pierre's Black with Holes for Control Alt, a culture lab on imagined futures in New York City, and the commissary Uamaukeia, which I look forward to, Adriel, you correcting my pronunciation here, with Dr. Keanu Sai for Aikai, a culture lab on convergence in Honolulu, reflected on how Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean and Pacific Islands are interconnected through diaspora, colonization, artistic expression, and borders. In this virtual studio visit, Pierre and Luis reconnect to discuss how their creativity has been affected by recent civil unrest, quarantine, and shifted relationships with travel. Can I also just say, Adriel, I really enjoy the series, the writings that you're doing every day, the notes from quarantine on your Instagram. I haven't seen them in a while.
Hey, thank you. What's up, JP? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I'm excited to be here. This is my Israel. So I think we're going to do a little something different. Do you want to start with the poems, Adriel?
Yeah. So hello, everybody. Actually, before we start with the poems, can we like do some kind of a
stretch?
Yeah. I mean, Monolith, Shani, it was incredible to see your work, learn more about your practice. Thank you. Yeah, if there's anything to keep my eyes glued on the screen for an hour, it's like dope art. That said, if you're like me, I've been zooming, dog. And so like, I need a A break. Let's. How do you break, JP? What do you do? Break.
Adriel sent me some pictures from Hawaii and videos from Hawaii of him teaching me, I think, Tai Chi. Was it Tai Chi?
They were like Qigong warm-ups. It's like Tai Chi light.
Warm-up. So maybe we can do a stretch. Maybe everybody just put their hands up.
Yeah.
Let's put our hands up. All right. Let's put them to the side. Let's go back up. All right. Out. In. Out. In. Last one. Out. Thank you, Adriel. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Word up.
Adriel shared some poetry with me. We had about 2.5 hour conversation prepping for this. And I asked him if I could share some of his poetry, and he wanted to share, I wanted to share mine, and he wanted to share his, and it's something we've been doing and creating during this pandemic. So I'll jump right in, and then Adriel will go. And our two poems kind of interrelate, and you'll see how they relate. Black inventions, white patents. Black churches, white Jesus. Black labor, white wealth. Black hell, white heaven. Black men, white women. Black bodies, white profits. Black wealth, white banks. Black education, white employment. Black ghettos, white real estate. Black consciousness, white guilt. Black prisoners, white investors. Black prisoners, white investors. Black plague, white medicine. Black excellence, white acceptance. Black love, white fear. Black spirituality, white religion. Black schools, white universities. Black pride, white power. Black dance, white choreography. Black film, white Hollywood. Black athletes, white billionaires. Black athletes, white billionaires. Black athletes, white billionaires. Black problems, white solutions. Black wisdom, white knowledge. Black cities, white country. Black music, white noise. Black Twitter, white media. Black crime, white lies. Black children, whitewashed. Black children, whitewashed. Black fathers, white flags. Black president, white house. Black integration, white flight. Black holes, which is something me and Adriel collaborated on, white dwarf. Black box, white knuckles. Black magic, white illusions. Black magic, white illusions. Black magic, white illusions. Black art, white galleries. Black Paris, white Harlem. Black berries, white wine. Black pain, white liquor. Black lynchings, white picnics. Black victims, white survivors. Black tie, white collar. Black ancestors, white ghost. Black ancestors, white ghost. Black ancestors, white ghost. Black nannies, white babies. Black players, white coaches. Black history, white historians. Black history, white historians. Black history, white historians. Black rap, white money. Black freedom, white plantations. Black being, white dismeaning. Black patients, white doctors. Black patients, white doctors. Black patients, white doctors. Black culture, white consumption. Black nipples, white milk. Black fame, white anonymity. Black cultures, white hunters. Black immigrants, white expats. Black pepper, white salt. Black beans, white rice. Black defendants, white jurors. Black energy, white power. Black natives, white treaties. Black conviction, white innocence. Black addiction, white crisis. Black mayors, white governors. Black protests, white silence. That's it.
I was so excited when you told me yesterday that that you had written a poem based on the painting, or the painting based on the poem?
The painting based on the poem.
This one.
So
that was the first piece I ever saw from JP at Nomad Yard on 411 New York Avenue. Yeah. Shout out to Desiree Van Frederick, creating such a magical space. Shout out to Les for introducing Lovely to Nomad Yard, who brought me there, which is how I encountered JP's work. I love DC. That's how DC works. Word. Thank you, man. I'll share something too. I came on learning so much about JP, and so yesterday we had discovered that both of us have poetic roots in our practice. So I'll share something that's actually from one of my quarantine notes that Seda was talking about. And actually, here I'll share a link in case you'd like to read along. I'll word up. Of course it was 411 based on New York Avenue, of course. So this piece is actually the first piece that I wrote after a month of not posting. It's not like I stopped writing, it's just that I was writing almost every day and posting on my Instagram. And then when the protests broke out for, George Floyd, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, Ahmaud Arbery, so many people, I just didn't really feel like it was, I just had a lot happening in my mind around like what was appropriate for my voice in the space. So this piece actually kind of is explosion of what had been going on in my mind for like a month. Somewhere between, beyond, lockdown, liberation, before, after, restlessness, unrest, until, upon, dismantlement, reparation, encompassing, aside from, calling out, seeking within, including, except, your silence won't protect you, who am I to speak? Not to mention, let's not forget, don't take up space, you better show up. Because despite, be the change, bitch, I'm not the one, considering ignoring, irreconcilable differences, bound liberations, however, and still, statements, undertones, but yet, disposing of Black life, capitalizing on Juneteenth, not the least of which, by extension, the atomization of Black and all, the conflation of matter and sacred, the necessity, the futility of centering the marginalized, decentering the center, to support the resistance, even against all odds. Arundhati Roy calls quarantine a portal. Angel Kyoto Williams calls the binary a hill. I gain my release here. So yeah, it was just like both of us, being Geminis, I think, we are messengers of the difference between binary and multitudes. And I felt like what I was writing through was feeling like everything that I wanted to say or do would fall on one side or another of a binary. And it was like, you know, for that first month of protests, I felt like I could think of any way to respond, and then open up Instagram and see a reason why it's problematic to do it that way. So I've been writing, but it's been a bit more reflective, and at some point probably share it. But I'm so excited to just connect with you, JP, and to an audience of just such incredible people. I guess first off, just wanted to shout out, I'm currently situated out here in the Bay Area at my family's place. This is Ohlone Chochenyo land, and we're gathering in honor of Piscataway land, Washington, D.C. So just want to honor that existence, honor that presence, and the continuous struggle, and just lay forth the intention for this conversation to be in service of that existence that continues.
Speaking of Piscataway land and indigeneity, I've been over this quarantine creating these videos using that that 3-time repeat. Adriel, can I share my screen and play a couple of videos that I made during these last streams? So these videos are kind of abstracts or pullaways from the poem that I read earlier. And so this first one, I've been getting into sports lately, and me and Adriel agreed not to talk about a very famous Gemini that's all over the news right now. But I do want to talk about an entertainer in a different light, athlete. And I have this book right here. Does everybody see this? $40 Million Slave. All right. So that person that we're not going to talk about is, like, I think having a difficult time articulating what this book talks about. Like, no matter how rich you are, if you're working within a slave system, you're still a slave. And this book is a really good book to study that or explore that. But there's been 2 athletes, one a cricket player by the name of Michael Holdings. He was like the Tiger Woods of cricket, Jamaican guy who was, I guess, told the line and did really good and was like a good and wholesome Negro. He was an athlete, a quote unquote $40 million slave. And he had a really touching take on race and history. And then there's another athlete, again, by the name of Hirita Lumumba. He was actually in Standing Rock and did a lot of indigenous work here in DC, and is working on indigenous movements. He was a rugby player. So I have a cricket player and a rugby player. I don't like talking too much. I just want to play the video. So I'm going to share the screen, and hopefully this works. All right, boom, it's gonna work. The ancestors are on my side right now. So I'm gonna play it, let me know if you see it.
When you say indigenous people, explain that a little bit, because we are more than what we are being told. We are more than what we are being told. We are more than what we are being told. Back at Black history, you look at the power that identifying with your indigenous traditions has. So when you look at the Haitian Revolution, the Haitians there, they were tapping into their indigenous identity. The Haitians there, they were tapping into their indigenous identity. The Haitians there, they were tapping into their indigenous identity. They were tapping into the forces of nature.
It is. Why is it that everywhere I go in this world, people who are considered Black are at the bottom of society? Our religious and spiritual practices were outlawed and taken.
So when you look at the Haitian Revolution, The Haitians there, they were tapping into their indigenous identity,
To me, it's about honoring the fight that my ancestors fought for my freedom today, and understanding that that freedom is still not won.
The Haitians there, they were tapping into their indigenous identity. They were tapping into the forces of nature. They were able to defeat all of the superpowers of the West. They were able to defeat all of the superpowers of the West. We are more than what we are being told. We are more than what we are being told. We are indigenous. We are indigenous. We are indigenous. We're people of the earth. We are people that live in harmony, not only with the earth, but we live in harmony with the cosmos. We live in harmony with the cosmos. We live in harmony with the cosmos, with the stars. We derive our identity off of that. Really, what it is about being indigenous is understanding your history is beyond your colonization. Beyond your colonization.
All right. So I think it's understanding that our history is beyond our colonization. I'm stopping sharing there. So that's one video. Do you have a video to share, Adriel? I really wanted to see the kid.
See what?
The kid running.
Oh, yeah. You know, it might be easier for me to just show you from my phone. But yeah, we could talk. So, JP, your practice, you're a painter, you collage, and so the video, when you shared it with me, originally I didn't realize that it was you editing it, and then watching it again, it just made so much sense because like one of your mediums is collage. And I feel like what you did with that video was you collaged different pieces to like kind of create, not even create, to highlight certain contexts, which I think is what really powerful collage does too. You take the, and I think something that great artists do is like taking topics that might seem like disparate, non-connected things, or things that don't seem like it should be the emphasis or would be the emphasis, and then emphasizing that, right? Like, so like within poetry, it would be like a found poem. Something I'm working on right now is I've been going through the GoFundMe page that has been that Elijah McClain's mom put up, and it's some really powerful writing. And so I've been I took it all and have been kind of like taking lines and kind of trying to pay tribute to him. But I'm probably not going to share it unless I get her permission. But anyway, as an introduction to sort of like what this is, which is another work that you did, the first project that we collaborate on called Black Holes. And this was shown at Control Alt, our first culture lab. And so, I bring up all the context of a collage so that folks can kind of like, when you see the work, you kind of get a sense of how JP's practice remains consistent regardless of the mediums, right? So if this ends up not being clear, I'll pull it up on the computer, but I feel like maybe, oh, you know what? Because of the background. Okay, I'll just share it.
Adriel,
I have
it queued up. I can.
Okay, dude, you do it then.
All right.
Yeah.
Boom. Let's see if this works. All right.
Yeah, and this is Elia. She's the daughter of Mimi and Lawrence. Lawrence is one of the curators also at Smithsonian APA.
All right, so I'm gonna let you keep talking, Adriel.
Yeah.
And so we shot this video. It wasn't really planned, and these doors were from doors found in DC from gentrification, pretty much 100-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old doors. Some maybe less, but all of them were aged and spent time literally in DC. And I created this portal, that's me right there, with questions. And there were 8 questions and 8 definitions that went with Black Holes. But enough talking, I'll just play the video and let you guys experience it from a child's point of view, with joy, with light, with a connection to the future and the past.
Not too fast, just right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good look back at me and like, I gotta catch you the other way.
All right, so I'll stop sharing now. Let me see.
Yeah.
There was a famous Gemini on the soundtrack.
Well, yeah. Music. When Seda and Les reached out about me speaking for SAMASAMA, I think I had just seen the promotion for the 48-hour live stream of Arthur Jafa's "Love Is the Message Is Death," and that also has Ultralight Beam playing, and you had selected that song to play also completely independently, because both of those pieces like pretty much came out at the same time. And so but I just remember like curating a culture lab, like which really quickly from a Smithsonian APA culture lab is basically like we'll have a very broad topic and be like, usually museums kind of front like we figured it all out, we're going to show you what this topic is, but instead with the culture lab we're like this sounds like a topic that's on the pulse of what people are really talking about, figuring out how do we harness the energy with some creative folks, scholars, artists, and really like explode the topic, right? And so the first one we did was in DC at the Smithsonian Arts and Industries building. And the point of that was really because I'd been working at the Smithsonian for like 3 years at that point, and I was frustrated about the divide between the local art scene in DC and the Smithsonian. I was like, how come I don't see any local artists at the Smithsonian? I wanted to see local art in a Smithsonian building. So we did it at the Arts and Industries building, which is next to the castle. It's the oldest building. It used to be the US National Museum. And 2016, if you look at the Google trends for the word intersectionality, it goes like this, right? And so we were like, okay, this is a word that like some people might consider fringe at this time, but we feel like it's going to be something that, if we don't really talk about it in depth, that it could get co-opted and, like used incorrectly, right? And so shout out to Shalove, she's out here. She was part of it along with Mazpaz. And then that's where JP, I think when we were deinstalling, or like that end of the very last day, he introduced himself to me, and he was like, hey, if you do another cultural lab, I'd love to be involved. And so the next one we did was in New York at the former site at the Pearl River Mart in Soho, and invited JP to be a part of that. And the theme for that was the imagined future. And it opened the weekend following the election. So everybody involved with that didn't know what, none of us knew how the election was going to turn out, of course, but we knew that they were going to, that year was also the year of Oscar So White, a lot of conversation, debate around race spending, science, all these science fiction films about white people saving the world that like were getting taken to task. And so we were like, how do we have a conversation about what the imagined future looks like when it's like people of color and marginalized folks who have a say. And so that's, long story short, where Black Holes comes out of. And amidst curating like 30, 40 works all in one space over one weekend, it stressful. And so, but in the basement was JP's work, and anytime I just needed a breather, I could just go into the installation, catch some ultralight beam vibes, and then like be on my way. So yeah. Yeah, shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw, definitely, for coining intersectionality back in the 90s.
She's out of University of Maryland, right? I think. No.
I don't know where she is right now.
She's
Art is saying Austin.
Okay.
UC Austin.
She's in U. So I have a second screen up, and this is supposed to be a studio visit. So this is my studio / gallery. Does everybody see that? Like, I don't know what. Okay, you guys see that. So this is my space. Half of the space is full of Haitian artwork straight from Haiti. You guys see my lighting now. And then the other half is my work. And a lot of my work is collage. My family were art collectors, Haitian art collectors. And
this is so Gemini of you. Look at you.
Don't. Okay, so I might cut this one off.
No, it's good. I like the double JP.
I wanted you guys. I couldn't turn my computer around, so I needed to log in on my cell phone in order to do that. But I have a few different styles, and that comes from me literally copying what I saw growing up, and then now I've created a collecting practice and art dealing practice as well. Can I share one more video with you guys? I wanted just to make it a little bit different than all of the other talks and just keep you guys kind of moving. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I know it's hard to hold people's attention after long days. Some people, I'm sure, are working. Share screen, boom. And to give an opening for this is Michael Holdings. He's a Jamaican cricket player. He talks about not experiencing racism growing up or playing football, but this is his take on history.
History is written by the conqueror. History is written by the conqueror. History is written by the conqueror, not by those that are conquered. History is written by the people who do the harm. History is written by the people who do the harm, not by the people who get harmed. And we need to go back and teach both sides of history. And until we do that and educate the entire human race, this thing will not stop. This thing will not stop. This thing will not stop.
All right.
Wow.
Pretty sure.
How do we get sports newscasters on in America like that?
I'm gonna read. I'm not the best reader, but I'll read this really quickly. The title of this book, $40 Million Slave, comes from, I'm gonna summarize this because I summarize things. I'm an artist, I consider myself an educator and a community activist. It's hard for me to say that last one, but I'll just call it out. All right, so Larry Johnson called his teammates a bunch of rebellious slaves. And a day later on the news live, when they were playing the Los Angeles Lakers, a heckler yelled out, Larry Johnson, you're nothing but a $40 million slave. For generations of European immigrants, the United States has been the promised land and the land of milk and honey. For enslaved Africans, American has become that Egypt of the book of Exodus. The quest to find the promised land in this new Egypt has, for many, a never-ending journey through a succession of ostensible promised lands, none of which has turned out to be the final destination. This has certainly been the case for Black athletes who have journeyed from slavery to segregation to the exploitative integrated sports world, never finding a true promised land, okay? Never finding a true promised land. Never finding a true promised land. The image of a tribe of athletes crossing a dusty, desolate wilderness sustained by faith that there is an ultimate destination remained my inspiration when I wrote this book. In the book entitled $40 million slave. I remember growing up thinking a millionaire was the final destination. If you were a millionaire, you made it, and you could change the world if you were a millionaire. And now, as we get older, and I think we talked about this, I think Monday night, Adriel was like, you can be a billionaire and still feel like you can't change the world, right?
Bezos, DC homie Bezos, just like his what was it, his personal value like went up $13 billion like yesterday. Crazy.
So I think this ties into the diaspora people, because I feel like we consider America like this promised land, or we consider the North the promised land, or we might consider the West, the new frontier, a promised land. For many Caribbeans, so I'm Caribbean American, we consider making it to the U.S. as the promised land, right? But to talk about some more current work I'm doing, so I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I'm restoring a mural that I created in 2013. It's a 120-foot mural, and the title of it is I Too Sing America. And Harvey, this little suburb of Chicago, it used to be a promised land. It was where a blues musician or a jazz musician from the south side of Chicago could leave the black hole, the ghetto, and move to a white suburb with the first outdoor mall in America, where the train tracks from Canada, New York, the West and the South all meet in Chicago. Like Chicago is like the industrial center of America, but Harvey, Illinois is the true where all the shipping yards were. People like the Rat Pack, Sammy Davis Jr., Mr. T bought his mom a house there in the 70s. It was one of the first places to get black people, but it was one of the first places to get crack, Gangster Disciples, and white flight. But it was a promised land. And you can probably buy a house in Harvey, Illinois today for about $12,000 cash. Just sit on that. The promised land is somewhere you could buy a house, $12,000 cash. So this place has Gangster Disciples, every gang you can imagine there. And there's no graffiti on this mural, but it hasn't been restored. And I just traveled to Chicago to meet with Chicago and Harvey, more specifically, because the plan is to restore that mural. We're pushing for Labor Day weekend, but it might be a little bit too soon. So, so it's not even a plug, but I wanted to talk about Promised Lands. I wanted to talk about Hawaii, Akai, our second show we did together, because I felt like I want to be part Hawaiian. The Pacific is beautiful. It reminded me of Haiti in a lot of ways, and like paradise in another way. And I know it's contradictory to say Haiti and paradise in the same sentence, but I don't think it's contradictory to say Hawaii and paradise. So we can talk about that. You want to talk about Akai? A show we did.
I mean, well, I wanted to check with Seda and Les. See, this is how we did a prep talk and went for 2.5 hours. But like, at what point?
Oh my God, 8:49. No, we should open.
No, I'm just wondering, like how much? At what point do we want to open it for questions? Then we can kind of like scaffold this.
I think questions now. But let's
talk about Akai real quick. Maybe we'll go for another 5.
Yeah, why don't you go for another 5, so we definitely at least get a little insight on that, and then cool. Go for it.
Yeah, cool. I mean, JP, I appreciate you showing your work, because I think like I knew that a lot of what we were going to end up talking about was going to be maybe less about the work themselves and more about this artistic process, right? Because I think, for example, one of the conversations that a lot of people have been having has been around like solidarity. What does it mean to show up if you're non-Black POC for Black folks? And and I was explaining to you yesterday how it's been difficult for me to figure out exactly how to engage in that because of where I grew up. Like Shani was talking about growing up in hip hop. I've grown up similar, like for those of us who grew up in hip hop, we took it serious. Like I took it personally when I went into like a Sam Goody and then there was no hip hop section, which is not to say, necessarily that like, not to say at all that like my experience is the same as, or is Black experience. But I think, the way that a lot of the discourse lands right now online, and this is probably just my interpretation, is it really feels like there's a lot of folks who are kind of like coming to terms, thinking about things for the first time. And I haven't been exactly sure how to insert, or whether to insert, perspectives for those of us who have been so intertwined in so many movements and identities. And so, for example, as soon as I came into the Smithsonian and started working at the Asian Pacific American Center, I thought it was very counterproductive that just because we were the APA Center, we were only working exclusively with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, right? Because my Asian American experience is only understood by also learning about Black and Latinx and Native experiences. I can't even understand what Asian American experience is without that. And so the Culture Labs are the beginning of us being like, in order for us to actually put forward what a conversation of Asian Pacific American experience can look like, there have to be Black artists involved, right? It can't just be Asian folks, it can't just be Pacific Islander folks. And there was plenty of pushback from within the Central Smithsonian, not necessarily like resistance, but more of just like, they were just confounded. They just didn't understand why JP, why Sheldon Scott would be a part of a, like, it'd be like, why aren't you part of the African American, why aren't these artists doing something with African American History and Culture Museum instead, right? Super Wax was a part of Cross Lines, so all that's to say, like when we did Control Alt, Dr. Keanu Sai, who is a professor out in Hawaii doing a bunch of work around Hawaiian independence, he was doing these lectures, and every time I went downstairs, I would just see you glued to your seat in the audience to Keanu's lectures, and and you were just, I don't know, could you speak a bit to like what it was that?
Haiti, Haiti, still has its indigenous name. That's with the Arawaks of the land, the same way the Piscataway were the original people here. Haiti is one of the few nations in the Western Hemisphere that still has its indigenous name. So I've been really tied to that and studying that and understanding that. And I understood that the Black liberation struggle in Haiti, the first quote unquote Black republic in the world, came out of an indigenous struggle. And I am reclaiming my indigenous roots, not only necessarily from the natives that were on the island in Haiti before the transatlantic slave trade, but there were indigenous people from West Africa that were pulled from their indigenous lands into a new land. And some of the things that I heard from Keanu were that Hawaii went through the same situation. And I was like, well, and I wanted to learn more about that. And I literally was glued, and to see brown faces, people is sun-kissed, I'll use the word, being kings and queens in Hawaii really intrigued me. Whether, I don't even think Akai was set in stone, but I knew I had to make my way to Hawaii and connect those dots. So everything from tattooing culture to the way that we bury our ancestors and look to our ancestors and speak to our ancestors were all indigenous technology. And oftentimes we relate to our spirituality as something spooky, but I'm understanding more and more that it's a technology, and that technology is what allowed us to obtain our independence. And I'm always interested and intrigued by finding ways to not be a slave. So I understand that money isn't necessarily going to get you off of a plantation, but maybe tying to your ancestors will. In Hawaii, the water, where the water meets the land, was a magical experience. You guys created a tribe of people on one front that consciously came together to create some energy that I think our ancestors collectively would be proud of.
Word. Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of discourse that you know, I feel like is the bread and butter of you know, the kind of work that we need right now. You know, like you know, I think a lot of people have been struggling to figure out like what it means for me to bring my whole self in a way that's not taking away from you, right? And I think that if you've been cultivated in a community where, you know, my wholeness and your wholeness is not seen as two separate entities, but really these convergences, right? Which is really what the theme of Aikai was about, was, you know, like one of the beautiful things I learned about how folks see Hawaii, and one of the big misconceptions is that, like, I mean, Hawaii, when we talk about Hawaiian independence, we're talking about a historic nation, historic multi-ethnic nation, right? Hawaii was diverse before it got taken over by the United States, right? You know, I've been studying up on ancient Chinese history. You know, the multi, you know, like before a unified China, you know, like that landmass that's now known as China, you know, it wasn't just Han Chinese people, and it wasn't even just Han Chinese or other ethnic minority folks, you know, like there was also a point in that landmass of China where people from Africa, people from the Middle East were coming in and being a part of that society. You know, I mean, it's so many generations ago, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't there, right? And so, yeah, dude, 2.5 hour conversation. This is how it happens. This is how it happens. So I feel like at some point, you know, like don't let these Geminis jump down another wormhole. We will.
So everybody is probably like, oh my God, I want to hear more anyway. But we'll let you finish the thought. And we actually had something that we wanted to kind of segue into that actually kind of connects with something the Sustainable Culture Lab's doing.
So
yeah. I mean, oh yeah.
Let me jump in. So first of all, I'd like to say I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And before I go into like the philosophical like perspective, I want to like throw in here as the philosopher Sustainable Culture Lab guy. I'll say with my work and with just me, you know, in existence, I didn't grow up around like a lot of Asian people. Like I grew up in Marietta, Georgia, and it was just like one black person and like a bunch of white people. Like that's just what it was. Like I had like one Asian friend and his last name was Park. And like there are so few Asian people in the South that I didn't even really know like what part of Asia, or like to think like, that dude's Korean. Like his name's Park, like clearly he's Korean, but like in the South, there's so few Asian people. They just tell you like they're Asian, and you just think that everyone, like it's like one big monolith. And so I say this is that the older I've gotten, it's always so like heartening when you hear Asian Americans talk about how much Black culture has been like a pivotal thing in shaping their appreciation and understanding of American life, whether that's hip hop or various African American liberation movements. It's like it's kind of, it might be cliche to say this, but I remember as being from Atlanta, when it comes to rap, it's just Outkast and then other stuff, you know? And so there was this Outkast documentary, and when they, you know, it was like their first tour, and they looked down the audience and there was a bunch of white people, and they were like, this is the craziest thing. I never thought white people would listen to my music. I was just making something that was like for my culture, and I just didn't imagine people that didn't look like me would be able to relate to it or appreciate or whatever. And so like, as you know, someone that's been indoctrinated with this outcast for days, when Asian Americans, you know, just talk about all these facets of African American culture that has shaped their lives, like my brain just like clicks to that moment when I was like in, you know, maybe college or something, where I saw that. I was like, man, this is just wonderful. And so I just want to like put that out there to start with. But one thing that I found really profound about everything that was we showed today is like my work as a philosopher. Like my mom was like a pretty good artist, but I'm not an artist. I'm a guy that just thinks a lot, and I'm a writer. And at some point I recognized that the language that America has to talk about our divisions was just really inadequate. Like we didn't have the words for what we saw and what we felt. And so I was like, it's, you know, my job will be to try to think of those words or to find those words. And that's where the Sustainable Culture Lab came from. And what a lot of people are talking about, and especially like you two guys, is my word. And I feel weird to like claim it, but like, because Raphael Lemkin invented it and then everyone kind of forgot about it. And now I've like reincorporated it to apply it to the transatlantic slave trade, which is what no one had done before. Ethnocide describes the struggle that we're talking about, where like there's a structure, that a culture that colonizers created with the explicit purpose of just having a mass of people in the society that are there to be exploited forever. And the exploitation is sustained by taking their culture away all the time. Whether that is like they're a great artist and we think their art's really good, great. Now we'll pay them a bunch of money to put it on a building that's being used to gentrify like a Black community in some other place. Or you know, it's really good, but let's like tone it down a bit so it's more mainstream, and you'll get more money for doing that than you did for like the original art that made them like you in the first place. And there's just so many different, in like sports, I can go for days about how American sports especially are just ethnocide, because so I'm a soccer junkie. I like soccer all day long. And in European sports, the athletes have way more power than in American sports. And there's a foundation of like investing in the community so that you can cultivate players, and also the bad teams get relegated. In the US, it's basically structured that there's just like a pool of just like talented Black people that they just like let the owners have their pick from, and the worst owners get the pick of the best players in the draft. And now it's the obligation of like the great athlete to now make this team better. It's all based around ensuring that like white owners survive, and there's just like a constant stream of talented Black people that just get forced to work for them. Doesn't exist like that anywhere else in the world, you know.
I want to interject really quickly.
Yeah.
Because I want to hear from the participants. Like me and Adriel could talk like this, but for hours, but like I'm interested in what the audience heard from us and if there's any questions, because one of my biggest fears before meeting Adriel, you were talking about the last name. I didn't know what race Adriel was. Like Adriel's pretty I was like, I hope he doesn't think I'm a racist. Like his first piece seeing me was Black inventions, white patents, right? And I speak really a matter of fact, factually, and like I'm not racist or whatever like that, but I want to hear how this talk came off from Adriel's point of view or from everyone. Like, did something seem off to what I said, or did it seem pretty in sync or succinct? Are there any questions?
I'll just real quick. I know we're going to go to the audience, and Sada's looking through the questions. I just want to chime in with a philosophical perspective on it. Like the language and frankly, your relationship and how you guys got along, I didn't find really any kind of source of discomfort in the slightest. But I just wanted to chime in with the importance of language with further connecting what you guys are saying and showing, and how this art combined with language and philosophy helps everyone articulate and understand and see the world that we're living in. And so, Seda, take it away.
Well, it looks like, you know, and I think this is something that typically happens at in our artist series in the last couple of weeks, is that we're kind of like offloading so much that people are processing and still thinking. So I'm not surprised that somebody hasn't had to kind of raise their hand here in the group to kind of offer that reflection. But I mean, JP and Adriel, everything that the dynamic and the conversation that you both are having is something that I think resonates in a lot of us, and you're really kind of hitting the spots with a lot of the you know, thoughts that you've, like, the points that you have been throwing out there just through that organic conversation you guys have.
Is it helpful to would y'all be interested in, you know, some other reading material? Like
yeah, exactly. So
because JP and I brought up some stuff, but yesterday,
actually,
but yeah, what's up, Seda?
No, and that's the thing. So I know that we give our artists such a small time, and everybody's carrying so much like value and like bits and work that what we typically do when we do end, which I think we're just going to end up having to do. I hate to cut this off, but we kind of offer all the participants access to your all's websites, Instagram, so that if, you know, they had a thought afterward, after they process everything, they can reach out directly to you all. And we highly encourage that. Not saying that you as artists with a lot of stuff on your plate have that obligation to answer, but that's something that we really encourage, as, you know, everybody has been, you know, actively listening here. So again, we hate to kind of like cut it off, and we could totally go on for hours, but we want to make sure that we have some sense of closure here. But please, like, if you all are open, we know people are going to be following you guys on Instagram, reaching out through your website. And once we, what we do at the end is we send all the participants an email link to the Zoom, so that way, again, people can kind of review it again, reflect, and have access to your information. So I will do a little bit of housekeeping, that being said. And so you can follow Sustainable Culture Lab, what Barrett and his team are doing at scl.community. And obviously SAMASAMAart.com. You'll have access to our links for the Diaspora Peoples Month past Zooms and events, as well as access to SCL and the participating artists tonight. And just a heads up to any artists that are participating have shared work that are for sale. 100% goes to the artists. And then any additional donations that you have thrown at to Diaspora Peoples Month splits between SAMASAMA and SCL, and then 10% of that actually goes to the DC chapter of Movement for Black Lives. Next week, we are going to be kind of closing it a little bit, but really closing it into a new beginning of the topic of Evtopia. And that's something that Barrett will kind of, again, with the philosophical aspect, will kind of really get into.
Yeah, so just to preview next week's event with Evtopia. Evtopia is a word that really, it's part of our philosophy at SCL, and you spell it, it's like utopia, but with an E on the front. But why we do that is that the word utopia is actually a farce. It's a joke, and like for 500 years, people have missed the joke, because topia means place, and Thomas More, who made the word, what he did is he got the Greek prefix EU, that means good, and the Greek prefix OU, that means non-existent, and he just cut off the E and the O and put the U on it to make a word that means non-existent, good place. And so what people have literally been trying to make their ideal place, and it literally means a good place that doesn't exist. And so like if we as a people are trying to make a good place that exists, at the very least, we should have a word that actually means good place. And like, we don't. And you can't get more dystopian than that. And so we use the word Evtopia so that people, at least at the foundation, have a word for good place. And then we can start cultivating what that looks like, what you have to do to have a good place, and what does good even mean. And so that conversation is what we will be doing next week. And also, like, if you talk to people about ethnocide, then you realize that America has it all over the place, and they get like sad and depressed. And now the question is like, well, what can I do? So what you can do is you can cultivate Evtopian spaces. And that's what we try to do. And that's what this event is about in the series of events.
Yep. So next week we're really kind of we, you know, Baron and I normally don't take up too much space as far as the chatting goes, but I think next week we'll have a little bit more opportunity to do that due to, you know, closing it up with Iftopia. So please, JP, Adriel, since you guys have some really amazing things to say beyond just like presenting your work, I think next week would be amazing if you guys kind of logged in and are part of that conversation. And, you know, with all of the words that Barrett is dropping, SEL every Sunday does a newsletter called The Word, in which he highlights a word that sort of has an essence and that kind of projects something philosophical that is very related to the umbrella of Diaspora Peoples Month and really just culture.
Yeah.
So.
Essentially, I think we live in a society where people lack, I mean, it's often the language for what they see and what they want to create, and that's where artists are so important. But to fully empower people more, we need to start injecting words into this space. And a lot of these words other cultures already have. So if I can give someone like a German word or a Filipino word or a Greek word that can help them articulate and see things in a better way, then I'll do that. And that's what we do once a week with our newsletter.
So thank you, Monolith, Shani, JP, Adriel. You guys were amazing tonight. Thank you. When we send our follow-up email, you can also get the book recommendations, and we'll definitely include that in that follow-up email.
Cool. Can I do a quick plug real quick?
Yeah, please.
All right. So for those of you who might be interested in what we're doing at the Smithsonian APA Center, and also Barrett, what you were talking about, I think in terms of like, you know, oftentimes Asian American communities, Pacific Islander communities as well, folks assume that we're just kind of on the coasts. You know, like folks think about New York, they think about North Virginia and the Bay, LA, maybe, you know, like the West Coast. And so on Friday, I've been carrying an event that we're going to host on Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, called Flow States. Here's the link in the chat, and it's a spoken word poetry music showcase specifically dedicated to queer Pacific Islander and Asian American artists. And for this event specifically, I've been developing a roster of artists from spaces that folks don't normally think about when they think about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So for example, we have a bunch of Pacific Islander poets out of Salt Lake City, because Utah has a huge PI population. We have a poet out of South Florida. We've got Asian American organizations speaking from out of New Orleans. And so if you're interested in learning about these communities that are really vibrant and really dope, but don't really get a lot of stage time, I definitely invite you to check it out. So you can live stream that. It'll be from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern time, and they're all young too. It's all going to be like age 13 to 25. So I definitely am encouraging folks to support these young people, because they're going to be they are the future.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, I think we are calling it a night. Les is going to drop in some tunes, and you guys, everyone have a great rest of your evening.
Test of the emergency broadcast system. There been an actual emergency, your local station, in conjunction with the relevant federal authorities, would have broadcast the following pre-recorded remote.
In every place there has to be a ruler, the president, a general, even a dictator, the emperor, a king, or a chief of some tribe. Anywhere in this world, up and down, side to side, the Southeast Asia, the Philippines, on the equator, land of water and green, like a kingdom of words and a army of rhymes. With a government opposed and against the line, in this part of the region, they call me the king. I'm the genesis of rap, the microphone brings great pleasure. I treasure with an echo on top, with the aid of percussion, I rap non-stop, with bracket to silence here, really sounds deaf. Stupid precious sonnet with a capital F. Some think I'm black when I rap attack, but when I see my colleague taking the back, cause I'm brown like wood, Filipino by blood. For Spanish, mestizo, my English is good. I can burn MCs anywhere in the world, anybody, anytime. Cause haven't you heard that I'm a king? Maim you, lame you whenever I please, and blow you away in other raps with these. Take your pick right now, get a gun or some weapon. By the time I go for mine, you be down, so I step on your head full of lead, call it ugly instead. I'm glad, not sad, that you're finally dead. Enough said, cause I gotta get old head. Too bad the lad is gonna make me mad. Stone cold blooded, the first degree murder. Plain self-defense, cause there ain't no other answer. Cussing and dissing, ill and not chilling, not realizing that I was listening. All of a sudden, the guns are firing, even Steven for no kind of reason. Men and women, young and old citizens, Dory got for life or totally irreverent. Pressure on my finger as I put it on trigger, happy go lucky, you blow it, it's over. You know what the mouth is? The mouth is like a gun. You know what kind of gun?
Bye, everyone. Peace out. Barrett, can you